let's talk about one of the darkest chapters in American history, the 4 men who assassinated presidents. You know, we've all heard the stories, but I'm willing to bet that most of us don't truly know the guys behind those infamous names. So, let me take you on a journey through the lives of John Wilkes Booth, J Goss, and Oswald, the men who pulled the triggers, plunged the knives, or fired the shots that changed America forever. First up, we've got John Wilkes Booth, the man behind Lincoln's assassination. Now, you might know he was a Southern sympathizer, but what you probably don't know is that his family was quite the drama-filled bunch. His father, Junius Brutus Booth, was a famous Shakespearean actor in England, but he abandoned his career, along with his wife and young son, to move to America with his mistress, Mary Ann Holmes, a flower girl. Yeah, it's like something out of a soap opera. Anyway, Junius becomes the most famous actor in the fledgling nation, and then, in 1833, he gives birth to their first son, Edwin. 5 years later, John Wilkes Booth is born. As a kid, young John attends a strict Quaker boarding school where he's considered an indifferent student, not exactly setting the world on fire. But here's what's fascinating. At this point in his life, John meets with a gypsy fortune teller who tells him that he'll meet a bad end and die young. Now, you might think that would be enough to deter anyone from following their dreams, but not John Wilkes Booth. He becomes interested in politics, attends rallies for the nativist Know Nothing Party, and starts dreaming of becoming an actor, just like his dad. And dream he did. By the time he's 17, John is already performing on stage in Baltimore. He takes on a pseudonym to distance himself from his famous family members, and eventually becomes known as an outrageous scene stealer with charisma to spare. But here's what gets interesting: despite never being considered technically good enough as an actor, his charm and personality made up for it. As the years go by, John starts expressing his pro-slavery views, not exactly a popular stance in abolitionist America. He attends the public hanging of John Brown, the famous abolitionist who led a raid on a federal armory, and even writes that slavery is one of the greatest blessings this world has ever known. Yeah, this guy was a real piece of work. Now, you might be wondering how someone with such strong views ended up assassinating President Lincoln. Well, it's a long story, but basically, John becomes radicalized by the South's defeat in the Civil War and starts believing that the only way to restore the Confederacy is through violent means. Fast forward to 1865, when John Wilkes Booth slips into Ford's Theater, ready to take out President Lincoln. The rest, of course, is history, but what's fascinating is how little we actually know about this man who changed America forever. You see, folks, the thing with these assassins is that they're not just one-dimensional villains, they've got complex lives and motivations that are worth exploring. And that's exactly what I want to do over the next few minutes, take you on a journey through their stories, so we can get to know them as people, rather than just infamous names. So, stick with me for this wild ride, because we're about to explore some of the most intriguing tales in American history. You might be surprised at what you discover. Imagine walking into a bustling city street on a sweltering summer day, only to stumble upon a name that'll leave you speechless: Charles J. Gau, the man who would change American history forever. Now, I know what you're thinking: who was this guy? Well, let me tell you, he's got a story that's as fascinating as it is tragic. Born in 1841 to a family of French Huguenots in Freeport, Illinois, Gau was the 4th of 6 children. His mother passed away when he was just a young boy, and his father, well, let's just say he had a soft spot for unconventional living arrangements. Gau grew up with a strong sense of purpose, thanks to his grandfather's $1,000 inheritance at the ripe age of 18. He attempted to attend the University of Michigan, but those entrance exams proved to be more than just a minor hurdle; they were an insurmountable wall for this young man. Feeling defeated, Gau left Michigan behind and headed north to Oneida, New York, where he joined a rather unique community. The Oneida community was the brainchild of John Humphrey Noyes, a charismatic preacher with a vision to create heaven on earth. This commune of 300 souls lived in a state of communal bliss, sharing property, possessions, and even group marriages. Yes, you read that right. And if that wasn't enough, they also had a rather unsettling habit of selective breeding for eugenics purposes. But hey, as long as it was all about the greater good, right? Gau, ever the enthusiast, threw himself wholeheartedly into this utopian lifestyle, often going so far as to call noise the embodiment of divine authority. His father, too, had ties to the community, and for a time, Guiteau seemed like he'd finally found his tribe. However, as with many an outsider, he struggled to fit in, and was even mocked by fellow members, who affectionately referred to him as Charles Guiteau. It wasn't long before Guiteau had had enough of this communal life, packing his bags in 1865 and striking out on his own once more. But the seeds of obsession had already been sown in his mind, specifically with regards to noise and his revolutionary ideas. This led Guiteau down a rather tortured path, where he began publishing books, like his magnum opus, The Truth, that were largely plagiarized from noise writings, while also filing lawsuits against the man himself. You see, Guiteau had begun to see himself as an instrument of divine will, chosen by some higher power to spread noise message and bring about a new era of enlightenment. This conviction only intensified after he survived a steamboat collision in 1880, which, in his mind, was the result of a benevolent deity intervening on his behalf. As the world outside seemed to spin faster and faster, Guiteau became increasingly fixated on politics, particularly with regards to the Republican Party. He backed Ulysses S. Grant's re-election bid in 1880, but when James A. Garfield entered the scene as the new nominee, Guiteau shifted his allegiance, even writing a speech in support of the man that he proudly distributed at the National Convention. Now, it might seem like small-time stuff to you and me, but for Guiteau, this was mission-critical. He genuinely believed himself responsible for Garfield's election victory, and when the new president took office, Guiteau was convinced that his reward would be a plum ambassadorship. Little did he know, however, that this would become the trigger point for one of American history's most infamous assassinations. You see, we've got a lot more to explore about Charles J. Guiteau and the intricate web of events that led him down this fateful path. But before I take you any further, let me ask, what drives someone to sacrifice everything in pursuit of a dream? Was it pure conviction? A twisted sense of purpose? Or simply the deep-seated madness? You ever hear about the guy who took down America's 25th president? Leon J Goss, that's his name, and it's a wild story. Born in 1873 to Polish immigrant parents in Detroit, Michigan, J Goss grew up with a pretty rough start. He began working in factories as a teenager, and by the time he was 17, he was already working at the Cleveland Rolling Mill Company. It was there that he saw firsthand the struggles between factory workers and owners during the Panic of 1893, a severe economic depression that forced many factories to shut down temporarily. Now, I know what you're thinking, what's the big deal about a factory closing? Well, it was more than just a shutdown. The owners were planning to cut workers' pay, which led to a massive strike. And let me tell you, this was J Goss' first taste of collectivized action, when ordinary people come together to fight for their rights. As he watched the police and factory owners crack down on the strikers, something inside J Goss snapped. He joined a moderate workmen's socialist organization called the Golden Eagle Society, but it wasn't long before he became radicalized by the Siler Club, a far more extreme group that preached anarchism. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Unemployed and feeling disillusioned with society, J Goss moved back in with his father and stepmother in Ohio. He spent most of his time holed up in their house, reading books on anarchism, trying to make sense of it all. He even attended a rally by the famous anarchist Emma Goldman in Cleveland. But here's the thing, J Goss just couldn't connect with people. His social awkwardness made him an outcast among fellow anarchists. So much so that one radical newspaper, the Free Society, actually put out a warning to steer clear of him, thinking he was a government spy. Can you believe it? Despite being shunned by the very people he wanted to join, J Goss remained convinced that the wealthy elite were exploiting the poor. He became fixated on this idea that the rich were getting richer off the backs of the working class. And then, something sparked within him. The assassination of King Umberto I of Italy in 1900 had left a deep impact on him. As one psychologist later noted, J Goss spent hours poring over accounts of the murder, even taking the newspaper to bed every night. This crime inspired J Goss to plot his own assassination, and he picked President William McKinley as his target. He traveled all the way to Buffalo, New York, where the Pan American Exposition was set to take place, just a week before the fateful event. On September 6, 1901, J Goss entered the Temple of Music at the Exposition with a concealed revolver in hand. And what unfolded next is history in the making. Buckle up, folks, because we're about to take a wild ride into the life of Lee Harvey Oswald, the man behind the infamous assassination of President John F. Kennedy. You might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't he just shoot JFK out of the blue? Well, yes and no. The official Warren Commission report did conclude that Oswald acted alone in killing the president, but there's so much more to this enigmatic figure than meets the eye. And let me tell you, his story is as twisted and fascinating as a thriller novel. Born on October 18, 1939, in New Orleans, Louisiana, Oswald was just 2 months old when his father, Robert, died of a heart attack. This marked the beginning of a life filled with turmoil and change. Oswald's mother, like many single parents at the time, struggled to make ends meet, and they found themselves moving from city to city, chasing better opportunities. As a child, Oswald was a bit of an oddball. He was known to be withdrawn and temperamental, often lashing out at those around him. When he was 12 years old, living with his half-brother John in New York City, Oswald got into a heated argument with his mother and even threatened his half-brother's wife with a pocket knife. Talk about dramatic. But amidst all this chaos, Oswald discovered a passion for reading that would stay with him throughout his life. At the tender age of 15, he became fascinated with Marxism and communism, a philosophy that would shape his worldview in ways both positive and negative. As Oswald entered adulthood, he made some questionable choices. In 1956, at the age of 17, he joined the Marines, hoping to follow in his older brother Robert Jr.'s footsteps. But instead of becoming a star soldier, Oswald got into trouble almost immediately. He was court-martialed for shooting himself in the elbow with an unauthorized handgun and later spent time in the brig after a fight with a sergeant. It was during this time that Oswald earned the nickname Oswaldskhovich among his squad mates, a nod to his pro-Soviet views, which were starting to gain momentum. He also began studying Russian, a language he would eventually become fluent in. Who knew? Fast forward to 1959, when Oswald decided it was time to leave the military behind. He received a hardship discharge and claimed that his mother needed care, but instead of going home, he used this as an excuse to embark on a daring journey through Europe and into the Soviet Union. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Oswald had been saving up money from his time in the Marines, and he used it to travel from France to the UK, then Finland, where he received a Soviet visa. In Moscow, he went so far as to publicly renounce his American citizenship at the American consulate, an audacious move that left even the Soviets scratching their heads. The story of Lee Harvey Oswald's life is like a puzzle with many missing pieces. While some might say he was just a troubled young man who stumbled into history, I say there's so much more to this tale than meets the eye. Was he a lone gunman or part of something bigger? We may never know for sure. As we wrap up this wild ride through Oswald's life, I want you to think about one thing: what drives someone to take such drastic action? Is it ideology, anger, or simply a desire to make a name for themselves? If you're curious about the life of Lee Harvey Oswald and the events that unfolded around him, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. We've got plenty of fascinating tales from history waiting to be shared, so join us on this journey through time. Stay tuned for more stories like this one, hit that subscribe button,